You have done this hundreds of times. The lunch queue at the Boots or the Tesco or the supermarket nearest to work, the fridge on the left, the sign at eye level, meal deal, sandwich, drink, snack, the familiar formula. You pick the same things you always pick, you pay the price on the sign, and you walk away having saved money. That is the understanding. That is what every meal deal in Britain has always been sold on. The question is whether the saving was ever real or whether the feeling of saving was the product all along. You started buying meal deals because they made sense. That is not a criticism. It is a description of how the format was designed to be perceived, and it worked on almost everyone. The meal deal is not a niche product for price-conscious shoppers or a promotional mechanism that appears for a few weeks and disappears. It is a structural fixture of British working life. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Boots, Co-op, Greggs, every major retailer with a food-to-go offer runs one. Millions of them are purchased every working day across the United Kingdom. The format is not incidental to how those retailers operate their food-to-go category. It is the spine of it. The habit formed for most people without a decision being made. You discovered the deal, you used it a few times, and then it became automatic. The weekly pattern of office lunches, site lunches, lunch breaks between appointments, the meal deal absorbed them all. At some point, the individual calculations stopped happening. You did not assess the deal on a Tuesday because you had assessed it enough times before that the outcome felt settled. Good value. The reliable option. The one that made sense. The assessment became the assumption, and the assumption became the behavior, and the behavior became the kind of habit that retailers spend considerable money trying to produce in their customers. That reliability is where the trust was built. Not through a relationship or a conversation, but through repetition. The same format, the same approximate price point, the same result. You handed over the money, you received the 3 items, the sign said deal, and the transaction confirmed it. No one scrutinized the unit prices of the individual components. No one calculated the per 100-gram cost of the snack against its shelf equivalent. No one stood at the meal deal fridge and worked out whether the £5 bundle genuinely represented a discount against what those 3 items would have cost individually. They did not need to. The sign had already told them. The word deal is doing a great deal of work in that transaction. In ordinary language, a deal is an arrangement that benefits the person accepting it. You say you got a good deal when you paid less than you expected, or less than someone else would have paid, or less than the thing was worth. The word carries a strong directional implication. The benefit flows to you. A retailer offering you a deal is positioning itself as having made a concession in your favor. Something has been given up on their side so that you can pay less on yours. That is the promise the word makes. It makes it every time the sign goes up, in every Boots and Tesco and Sainsbury's, on every working day of the year. The promise is ambient. It does not require a salesperson or a leaflet. It is built into the label. The meal deal as a format has been in continuous operation in British retail since the early 1990s. Boots introduced one of the earliest versions, and the major supermarkets followed through the decade as food to go became a recognized and growing category. By the 2000s, the format was sufficiently normalized that it required no explanation. Shoppers did not need to be told what a meal deal was. They already knew. That knowledge, the settled, unexamined understanding of what the format meant and what it offered, was the foundation on which 3 decades of meal deal pricing was subsequently built. The foundation was trust. The construction on top of it was something else. The price of a meal deal in 2010 at a major UK supermarket sat around £2.99 to £3. By 2016, it had moved to £3 to £3.50. By 2022, it was approaching £4 in most chains, and by 2023, it had cleared £5 at Tesco and Sainsbury's, with Boots holding at £5 across its lunchtime format. Each of these movements happened without the format losing its fundamental positioning as the affordable lunchtime option. The price rose by 60 to 70% across a decade and a half, and the deal remained the deal. The label did not change. The implied promise did not change. The consumer understanding did not change. Only the number on the sign changed, and it changed gradually enough that the recalibration happened without registering as a price rise. It registered, if it registered at all, as the world getting more expensive, which it was, while the deal remained the reliable response to that. A fixed point in a shifting landscape. That framing did not emerge by accident. What made the format so durable was not the price. It was the psychology of the three-item bundle. Sandwich, drink, snack. The triptych is specific, and it is not arbitrary. The sandwich is the reason you are there. It is the item you selected first, the one you came to the fridge to find. The drink and the snack are secondary choices made within the frame the deal has already established. Once you have picked the sandwich, you are already in the meal deal decision. You are not comparing whether to buy a meal deal. You are choosing which meal deal to have. The structural question, is this bundle actually a good use of £5? Has already been answered by the time you reach for the crisps. The format collapses the evaluation into the selection. You choose between options inside the deal. You do not choose between the deal and its alternatives. This is the architecture. Not the architecture of fraud, and not the architecture of malice. The architecture of an information environment that has been arranged to produce a specific conclusion. The consumer who walks to the meal deal fridge has already, by the act of walking there, decided that the meal deal is what they are buying. The question the format asks is which sandwich, which drink, which snack, not whether. And the answer to the question nobody asked, the one about whether the deal was ever real, was sitting in the individual shelf prices of the same items in plain sight the entire time. A Tesco chicken and bacon sandwich, purchased individually from the same refrigerated shelf in the same store, at the same time as the meal deal is on offer, £3.50. The same sandwich is available as part of a £5 meal deal. The deal, in this configuration, is contributing £3.50 of its £5 value to one item. The drink and the snack must account for £1.50 between them. A 500 milliliter bottle of Tesco own brand water sits on the adjacent shelf for 35p. A bag of Tesco own brand crisps, 45p. Total individual cost of those three specific items, £4.30. The meal deal price, £5. The saving, -70p. That arithmetic is not an accident of one product combination on one day at one retailer. It is the output of a pricing structure that was built to produce it. The individual item prices on the shelf are not the prices at which those items were expected to sell. They are anchors. The function of an anchor price is not to represent the likely transaction value. It is to establish a reference point against which another number looks favorable. When the Boots meal deal sign says you save £3.49, the saving is calculated against the sum of the individual shelf prices of the components. The shelf prices were set, in part, to make that saving figure as large as possible. The saving is real in the sense that the arithmetic checks out. The shelf prices are real in the sense that you could theoretically pay them. What they are not is the price at which any rational actor with full information would purchase those items individually. They are the price at which nobody buys them. set at the level required to make the bundle feel like a rescue. The Competition and Markets Authority's review of the UK grocery sector, published across 2023 and 2024, addressed the anchor pricing problem directly. The practice of setting artificially elevated regular prices to make promotional or bundled prices appear more generous was identified as a feature of the market, not an anomaly. The CMA noted that unit pricing compliance, the requirement that retailers display the cost per 100 grams or per litre alongside the shelf price, was inconsistent and, in the food-to-go context, largely absent. A consumer standing at a meal deal fridge is not provided with the per-unit cost of the sandwich filling per 100 grams, the per-litre cost of the drink, or the per-gram cost of the snack. The information required to evaluate whether the bundle is genuinely cheaper than its components, presented at the granularity needed to make that evaluation, is not available at the point of purchase. It is available if you go looking for it, with the right tools, away from the store. Almost nobody does, which conducted price tracking across UK supermarket meal deals and published findings that aligned with what the CMA's broader review had identified. The individual components of meal deals, when priced on a per-unit basis and compared against equivalent products available in the same store, frequently produced bundle totals at or above the meal deal price. The saving, the number on the sign, the figure that justified the deal label, was in multiple documented cases either marginal or absent when calculated against realistic alternative combinations rather than against the artificially elevated individual shelf prices. The findings were published. The numbers were on the record. The response from the retailers followed a pattern that is by now familiar. Meal deal prices reflect the cost of quality ingredients and the convenience of a curated selection. Customers have choices. The value is clear from the price on the sign. None of those statements engaged with the arithmetic. A bundle priced at or above the realistic cost of its components is not a deal. It is a product. Calling it a deal, displaying a saving figure calculated against inflated reference prices, and positioning it through 3 decades of consistent marketing as the affordable lunchtime choice. That is not a description of the product. It is a claim about the product that the evidence does not support. The gap between the claim and the evidence is where the margin is made. The margin does not sit where most people assume it does. The sandwich is not the profit engine of the meal deal. It is the most expensive item to produce, the most perishable, the most labor-intensive, and the item most likely to be purchased for its own sake, which means it is also the item most subject to competitive price pressure. The sandwich is the reason the fridge exists and the reason the customer is standing in front of it. It is not where the money is. The money is in the drink and the snack. Own brand crisps, produced at scale, carry margins that the food manufacturing industry and retail analysts have placed consistently in the range of 60 to 80%. The cost of producing and packaging a standard bag of own brand supermarket crisps at the volumes a major UK retailer operates is a small fraction of its shelf price. The same economics apply to own-label confectionery, to cereal bars, to the snack items that populate the meal deal eligible list. The drink margin is similarly structured. Own-brand water, own-brand cola, own-brand juice drinks. The per-litre production and distribution cost at supermarket scale is not a significant number. The retail price is. When those two items together contribute between £1 and £1.50 to the meal deal price, and their combined production cost is a fraction of that, The meal deal's overall margin is being carried substantially by the two items the customer thought of as an afterthought. This is not coincidence. The eligible item list, the specific products the retailer designates as qualifying for the meal deal, is a margin decision. It determines which snacks and drinks the customer can select within the bundle, and therefore which items' margins are being captured inside the £5 price. Premium snacks, branded items with lower retailer margins, higher cost drinks that the retailer stocks for the convenience category but does not manufacture. These items appear on eligible lists less frequently or not at all, or with conditions attached. The curation of the eligible list is the curation of the margin profile. It looks like generosity. Here are your snack options. Choose what you like. And it functions as a margin constraint on the customer's selection that the customer has no visibility of and no reason to suspect. The behavioral science behind this architecture is not speculative. It has been documented, tested, and published in the retail pricing literature for decades. Loss aversion, the well-established finding that people respond more strongly to the prospect of losing something than to the equivalent prospect of gaining it, is the engine the deal framing runs on. The sign that says you save £3.49 is not informing you of a financial fact. It is activating a loss aversion response. Not taking the deal means leaving £3.49 on the table. The mind does not process that as a neutral choice between two equivalent options. It processes it as a potential loss. The deal framing is not a description of the price. It is a psychological instrument, and the people who set the prices and designed the signs understood exactly what instrument they were picking up. The suppression of comparison is the second mechanism. A consumer evaluating a meal deal is by definition comparing meal deal options against each other. Which sandwich? Which snack? Which drink? The frame of the evaluation is internal to the deal. The questions that do not get asked: is a packed lunch cheaper? Is a competitor's sandwich bought separately better value per gram? Is the drink available at a lower price per litre from the adjacent ambient shelf? Are closed off not by any deception, but by the architecture of the decision environment. You are standing at the meal deal fridge. The relevant comparison within that environment is between meal deals. The comparison that would actually tell you whether you are receiving value between the bundle and its realistic alternatives is not the comparison the environment is structured to produce. By the early 2020s, the meal deal price had crossed the threshold where the original value proposition, even taken on its own stated terms, had become difficult to sustain. At £5, the format was no longer clearly cheaper than a reasonable packed lunch equivalent assembled from a weekly shop. Consumer groups began making this calculation explicit. The arithmetic of a homemade equivalent, bread, filling, a piece of fruit, a bottle of refilled water, came in at a fraction of the meal deal price when calculated across a working week. The comparison the deal framing had always suppressed was being made publicly by people whose job it was to make it. And the numbers, once made visible, pointed in a consistent direction. The direction they pointed had a name, and the name was in the pricing records. A meal deal that cost £2.99 in 2010 and £5 in 2023 had increased in price by 67% across 13 years. The consumer prices index across the same period rose by approximately 45%. The meal deal, the product positioned throughout that period as the affordable, reliable, fixed-point lunchtime option, had inflated faster than the headline rate. That fact was not announced. There was no press event at which Tesco or Sainsbury's or Boots explained that the deal was now less of a deal than it had been, that the gap between the bundle price and its realistic alternatives had narrowed. that the saving the sign advertised was being calculated against reference prices that bore a diminishing relationship to what any informed shopper would pay for those items individually. The price went up. The sign still said deal. The label did the work that the evidence no longer supported. The industry documentation of this process is not limited to consumer group findings. Retail pricing strategy as a discipline has produced a substantial body of published work on bundle pricing mechanics and their relationship to consumer perception. The core finding, replicated across multiple retail contexts, is that bundle pricing is most effective when the consumer cannot easily reconstruct the individual component costs. A bundle whose components are readily price comparable to alternatives available in the same store is a less powerful anchoring instrument than a bundle whose components are difficult to evaluate on a standalone basis. The meal deal, in the food-to-go context, benefits from both conditions simultaneously. The sandwich is a prepared food item with no obvious per-gram equivalent on the ambient shelf. The own-brand snack is cheap enough that the consumer does not think to check whether it is cheaper still on the main grocery aisle. The drink is positioned in the food-to-go fridge, not alongside the ambient drinks where the per-litre price would be more visible. The environment is arranged so that the components resist individual evaluation. That arrangement was not the result of store layout decisions made for unrelated reasons. It was the context in which bundle pricing works best, and it is the context that was maintained. The Competition and Markets Authority's position on this is the coldest fact in the entire account. The CMA examined the UK grocery sector. It identified anchor pricing as a feature of the market. It noted the unit pricing compliance gap in the food-to-go category. It produced a report. It did not produce enforcement action specific to meal deal pricing mechanics or bundle anchor pricing. The practice of setting individual item prices at levels designed to make bundle prices appear more favorable than they are, a practice documented, named, and placed on the record by the regulator's own review, remained and remains entirely legal. No law was broken. The saving figure on the sign is calculated against real prices, prices that are displayed in the store and available to any customer who chooses to note them. The fact that those prices were set at the level required to produce an impressive saving figure, rather than at the level at which any significant volume of those items is sold, is a pricing decision. It is not a criminal one. Consider the scale of what that legality permits. 5 million meal deals purchased on a working day across the United Kingdom is a conservative estimate for the major retail chains combined. If the manufactured margin above a genuinely competitive individual price, the amount extracted per transaction by the anchor pricing mechanism, above what a fully informed consumer in a fully transparent market would pay, is 80 pence per bundle, the daily aggregate is £4 million. Across 250 working days, it is £1 billion annually, retained by the retailers, extracted from consumers who believed the sign that said they were saving money. The number is an illustration, not an audit. The mechanism it illustrates is documented. The arithmetic is the same arithmetic the consumer groups published, applied at the scale the format operates. That scale is what the individual transaction conceals. Standing at the meal deal fridge, picking a sandwich, reaching for the crisps, you are one person making one small purchase with one modest outcome. The outcome, aggregated across every person making the same purchase in the same store on the same day. In every store of that chain, across every working day of the year, produces a number that the individual transaction gives no indication of. The gap between what the consumer believed they were paying and what a transparent market would have produced, that gap multiplied by the volume is not a rounding error in the retailer's accounts. It is a revenue line. It was built deliberately, maintained consistently, and protected by a label that told the consumer the opposite of what the architecture was doing. The practical position available to anyone who buys meal deals regularly is not complicated, though it should not be necessary. Calculate the individual shelf price of each component before adding it to your selection. Not the meal deal eligible shelf price, but the price at which the same item or its closest equivalent is available on the main grocery shelf or the ambient aisle. Compare that total against the meal deal price. Apply the per 100 gram or per litre calculation to the drink and the snack, and compare against own brand equivalents in the weekly shop. Make the packed lunch calculation once for one working week against the cost of 5 meal deals at current prices. None of this analysis requires specialist knowledge or unusual effort. It requires only that the comparison the deal framing was designed to suppress is made visible, which is the one thing the format was arranged to prevent. The supermarket did not hide the prices. The individual shelf prices are on the labels. The meal deal price is on the sign. The eligible item list is displayed at the fridge. The information required to evaluate whether the bundle is genuinely cheaper than its components is technically present in the store. What was hidden was not the data. What was hidden was the question. The question of whether the deal was a deal, whether the saving was real, whether the reference prices were honest, whether the eligible list served the customer or the margin, was hidden inside an environment arranged to ensure it would not be asked. A disclosed price structure that was designed from the outset to prevent evaluation is not a transparent product. It is a concealment that passes the legal test by making the concealed information technically available to anyone determined enough to find it. You are back at the fridge. The queue has moved. Your hand is reaching for the same section it always reaches for. The sign says meal deal. The number on the sign is higher than it was 3 years ago, and higher still than it was 10 years before that. And the saving figure next to it was calculated against prices set for the purpose of producing a saving figure. The sandwich in your hand costs what it costs. The crisps, in the other hand, were chosen from a list that was built around the margin they carry, not the choice they represent. The drink will go in your bag. You will pay at the till. The transaction will feel like the smart option, the efficient one, the one that made sense, because the environment you were standing in was designed with considerable expertise and at considerable scale to produce exactly that feeling. That was the plan. The deal was never for you. It was for the belief that it was.